Do you believe in reincarnation? Or for you, is it simply the fruit of human imagination? My son's story convinced me that this phenomenon indeed existed. All this is happening in the hospital where I gave birth to my baby. Before we continue with the story, do not forget to click on the notification button in order to get notified at every new video posted. Thank you. After enduring a long and tiring pregnancy, I went into labor on a Wednesday evening. I was with my husband that night. We went to a restaurant where he wanted to treat me to one of my favorite dishes before I welcomed our baby. And it was while tasting my fresh cream pasta that my water broke. Unfortunately, I couldn't finish my dish because we had to go straight to our apartment to be able to gather the necessary before going to the hospital. So that's how 2 hours later, we found ourselves at the St. Paul Hospital, where I was quickly taken care of. My doctor, despite all his experience, had great difficulty in channeling the complications that multiplied as my labor progressed. My baby was coming into a breech position, a C-section was being recommended, and my blood pressure was climbing at an alarming rate. After more than 24 hours in the delivery room, I ended up giving birth to a beautiful baby boy. I don't know if I should call it a miracle, but at the end, the baby that came into a breech position ended up straightening up without resorting to any intervention from the doctor who was following me. In addition, the blood pressure, which rose in an awful way, ended up disappearing like magic. My son was born healthy, and I was fine too. So a few seconds after they put him in my arms, the maternity ward sang a melody that resounded throughout the hospital, that of a lullaby to signify that a baby had just been born. It was a tradition with them to put such a melody every time a baby was born, a way of celebrating life. And it was after putting me in the restroom with my baby that the head nurse came in with a letter addressed to me. She made me understand that after the birth of my son, a lady approached her and asked her to give me this piece of paper. I was very curious to know who it was, since all the members of my family were in another city and had not yet heard of the birth of our baby. So it was totally impossible that it was one of the women of my husband's family or mine who was the author of this letter. I immediately opened the letter, and in it I discovered the most moving words I had ever read. I know you will find this strange, but first of all, I want to congratulate you for the wonderful baby you just had. My name is Mrs. Francine Bethel, and I left the hospital where you just gave birth just an hour ago. For more than a year, I was interned in this hospital with my father. He was suffering from cancer, and his run ended seconds before your baby was born. The sound of your child's welcome melody rang like a sign in my heart. It felt like my father had the chance to be reborn again. I know we don't know each other, and maybe we'll never meet. But I wanted to know if you could help me bring my father back to life by giving your baby his last name. If you accept it, it will be an immeasurable honor for me. In case you do agree, my dad's name is Thomas Bethel. I leave here my contact details if necessary, my address, and my phone number. Thank you for at least reading my letter, and I wish you much happiness with this precious life you have in your hands now. The letter was so moving that I had my husband read it when he came back into my room. We discussed it for about an hour, wondering if giving that name to our baby would be a good idea. And after going around the question, we decided that our son would not only bear the name Bethel, but the name of the man in full. The story behind it was so strong that we did not hesitate to give our son the opportunity to have a fairy tale behind the choice of his name. Thus, 3 days after my release from the hospital, we decided to establish my son's birth certificate and called on the lady in question to serve as our witness. Anyway, it was the least we could do, since it was her who inspired us with this name. She happily agreed to play this role, and after the issue of the baby's birth certificate, she invited us to have a tea at her house. We had no idea of what awaited us. It was when at the entrance of the woman's house that we began to understand what was going on. She lived in a huge mansion, and acres of land were surrounding the building. Once inside, we had no words to describe the admiration we had for the house we had just entered in. There were about 15 servants. The furniture was made out of luxurious wood, and the ceiling was decorated with crystal chandeliers. It was absolute opulence. She therefore invited us to sit in the tea room and brought out 3 photo albums of her childhood. She told us the story of her dad and how he marked her life. This is how we discovered that her father was the founder and owner of the most prestigious chocolate brand in our country. She told us how hard he worked to achieve his dream. She also did not fail to mention the fact that she was the only offspring of this hard-working man, and that she had lost her mother 40 years earlier in a tragic car accident, and that since the death of her mother, her father had given love no chance and had devoted himself, body and soul, to his work in order to offer his daughter a better future. He took the capital of the chocolate factory on stock market and became a multi-billionaire. But despite his efforts to put his daughter out of need, he ended up being diagnosed with a particularly violent cancer. That's how he ended up in the hospital and spent the last year of his life battling this disease that threatened to separate him from the one person he was still fighting for. Now that he was gone, she found herself alone in front of the world, who just looked at her like a cash machine because of the immense wealth her father had left her. This is why, without even knowing us, she begged that we gave her father's name to our son, a way for her to feel less alone in this world. Her loneliness increased with the fact that she was medically diagnosed many years back to be totally infertile. Despite several attempts of her to have children, they all totally failed. In addition to her 3 divorces, which resulted from the fact that all her husbands were interested only in the money her father had. Reason why she was single and childless at the age of 67. The story of this lady touched us so much that my husband and I could not resist the urge to crush a few tears in the face of all the loneliness this woman suffered. Despite the immense wealth in which she swam, there was a great void in her heart and around her that was impossible to ignore. So we concluded, my husband and I, to visit her every weekend with our son in order to bring a little more warmth to this woman. She took part in our son's parental visits at school and acted as a substitution grandmother. As our son grew, he became more and more attached to her, even more than our own respective mothers. He was also developing character traits that she described as identical to those of her father. He liked to read history books just like Mr. Thomas Bethel. He also loved wearing white shirts and neatly pressed pants like his grandfather. And sometimes he even said things that only Mr. Bethel could have ever known, giving us the impression that he was the reincarnation of the latter. This did not prevent our 2 families from living in perfect harmony. But the most touching thing that woman did changed her son's fate forever. 10 years later, on her hospital bed, she gave us a letter before dying at her turn. In this letter, she gave her entire inheritance and her father's chocolate factory to our son because she was convinced that he was the reincarnation of her father. And so, it all just happened because of our son's choice of name. His destiny changed forever.